Hey everybody. I wanted to do a quick kind of discussion of the last couple topics that I'm going to be out for paternity leave. So the last three are all pretty short. This first one is kind of building on these externalities we've been looking at, but it's looking specifically at the difference between public and private goods. So this is the 6.3 section. First off, let's do a little bit of a recap, right? So here we have our social benefit and our social cost. And our marginal private benefit, right? The private benefit's going down. The more we use of a product, the less additional benefit we're getting out of it. The social cost is going up, right? The cost of these additional goods are going up. So it's not giving us any specific product here, it's just saying good X. And it's assuming that we're producing at the free market levels, where the private benefit is meeting this social cost. So the free market wants us to produce here at QFM, Q free market, and the price at $15. All right, but if we're looking at the socially optimal point, it's saying that that's at this point right here, Q optimal, and it's at $20. So the first thing this is asking us is, do we think this would represent a positive or a negative externality, right? So if the social benefit is higher than the private benefit, that means that the good to society outweighs the good that it's doing to us. So the distance between these two curves would be our positive externality, right? And if we're producing at this free market level, right, we've got to think about whether we're overproducing or underproducing this good, right? If we're producing this much, but society, Q optimal, so the socially optimal point wants us to produce this much, then we're currently underproducing this good, that we're not producing enough of it, right? So society wants us to make more. The social benefit outweighs the private benefit. And so then the final piece of this puzzle is, okay, well, what would we change? Would we tax or would we subsidize this good? If we're trying to encourage the production of it, we would subsidize it. And if we're looking at how much we would subsidize it, we're looking at the distance between these two curves, right? So at this Q optimal, the price is 10, the social benefit is 20. So if we subsidize this good by $10, that would push up the private benefit to meet the social benefit, right? And that's the goal of, if we're looking at things like vaccines, we want to subsidize them and make them cheaper. That way everybody gets that higher benefit out of it. More people go and get the vaccines, and so they make them cheaper or for free. Now, the end game of all of this is, if we subsidize it, or if we give people tax rebates or things like this, it drives up this private benefit so we get to the social benefit. And now we have a new equilibrium, right? That our output has gone up, we're producing more vaccines now, and in theory the prices are higher, except the government is subsidizing the difference between those. So we're not paying those higher costs, the government is there. That way we have little reason not to get them, unless you're worried about health issues or things like that, but the private benefit meets the social benefit. All right, so today's content's not anything super tricky. And Ms. Slack, if you just want to pause it for a minute, if they need to write everything down, that's fine. Otherwise, I'll just kind of go ahead. But what we're looking at with this section is just the difference between public and private goods, which most of us are already familiar with, right? But there's a couple caveats or a couple things that we're going to add on to it, though. So we talked about this invisible hand of economics, that pure free market economists would say that we don't need a government to dictate the economy. The free market would work itself out on its own. But there's certain situations in which that might not necessarily be true, right? If we're looking at the public sector, areas of our economy that are controlled by the government, there's a lot of different reasons why this might happen, right? If we're looking at like schools, maybe it's more cost effective, economies of scale, that the more, the bigger of a school we build and the more teachers we have, the more can get done here, right? If you look at Brunswick High School versus, let's say, a small 1A school, we've got options here, right? We've got AP Micro and Macro. We've got probably 15 different AP classes. Whereas maybe Macintosh, since they have fewer teachers, maybe they only offer 3 or 4. All right, so sometimes it's more efficient or more productive for the government to do it. Sometimes there's the private sector isn't profitable, but it's still important. If we look at the library, right, it's part of the public sector, it's run by the government. I wouldn't say that it's probably profitable, but the social benefits of it are really high, right? So the government will maintain that library because it provides free internet service for people that don't have it. It provides books, it provides, resources for kids and different activities for them to do. The private sector would be any individually or privately owned business. Most people work in the private sector, right? They work for private businesses and you don't have that level of government control. Now, if we're looking at this idea of public versus private, one of the big things that keeps coming up is taxes and how we spend our taxes. And so I get this all the time from my friends that don't have kids. Well, not so much my friends, I would say, but I hear it a lot from people that don't have kids, is why should I be paying these property taxes if I don't have kids that are going to school? And the answer is because you going to school benefits them too, right? That you being better educated makes you less likely to commit crimes. You being better educated makes you more likely to contribute to society or to buy houses or to open up businesses or contribute in some way or another. So even though they're not directly benefited from it, there is that social component that you being better educated makes everybody better off. Now, to go back to this idea of why some markets are private and some are public, the first issue that we come across here is this idea of free riders. Right, and that comes from like this old saying where people would hop on the back of trains and would just ride from one town to another, and there wasn't really a way of stopping them once the train got started. So with public goods, one of the issues that we have here is these free riders, right? That to go back to the example we talked about the other day with roads, right? If roads were built by private businesses, it would be very difficult to keep people off of the roads, even if they're not paying for them. Right? So with public goods, they have to be available to everybody, whether they pay taxes or not. Let's say that you dodge paying your taxes for 20 years. You're still being protected by the military. You still benefit from getting to drive on roads. You still benefit from access to hospitals in the community. Right? Those would be our free riders, right? People that are taking advantage of public services without providing money to it. Now, in the private market, that doesn't really work, right? I can't go to a restaurant and eat their food and then leave without paying, right? That's illegal, right? Businesses go out of business for that. But it's kind of the way the public sector is set up. You being at school isn't determined by how much taxes your parents pay, right? Everybody has an equal right to school, regardless of parents' contributions, whether it's a lot or a little or somewhere in between. So if we have these free riders, it makes it more difficult for private businesses to make a profit off of things, right? If you look at things like private militaries, right? What happens if we have a private military and I decide not to pay them, right? Am I still protected by them? Do they do less of a good job in protecting our country? It gets kind of complicated. It gets messier. Sometimes it's just easier to have the government run a part of the economy. And so if it were left to the free market economy, right, things would be underproduced because there's people that aren't willing to pay for this. So what we say is, all right, everybody that lives in our area or zip code has a right to attend public school. If we based it on money, there would be people that wouldn't be able to afford to send their kids to school. And we don't want that. We don't want kids to be denied an education because their parents don't have money. And so certain areas of our economy don't work in the private sector because of this free rider issue, because it would be impossible to collect money from everybody for a certain service. So instead we collect tax dollars from everybody and then allocate that money how we see fit. All right, so when we're looking at public goods, and at least one of these questions pops up every single time on the AP test, it's just weird criteria that we have for public goods. For a good to be a public good, two things need to be true. First, it needs to be non-exclusionary. To exclude means to prevent somebody from doing something. What that means is that public goods, we can't exclude who's able to use it based on who's paying or not paying, right? Everybody has access to the public library. Everybody has access to our roads. Everybody has the protection of our military. We don't get to pick and choose who gets it, right? So public goods are paid for by everybody and are available for everybody. And there has to be shared consumption, or it's non-rivalrous. And what that means is that my use of a public good doesn't impact your use of a public good. You being at Brunswick High School doesn't mean that someone else can't come to Brunswick High School. You going to a park doesn't prevent somebody else from enjoying that park. Or you going to the library doesn't stop somebody else from going to the library. So these are public goods because they're available for everybody, and it's not like on a first come, first served basis. We're sharing the consumption of this, and it's not, rivalries. We're not competing over these resources like when we did that Hershey Kiss activity and we all demolished the chocolates within a couple seconds, right? We're not facing the issues of that tragedy of the commons because we're not rivalrous over these resources. Right, and so that's the last bit of the 6.3. I'll make a short video for the 6.4 and the 6.5 as well. But if you're having trouble with it, remember that the sections that go along with this in the book are up on the whiteboard to the right side of the room. It has where you can find them in the page, and we'll have some practice that goes along with it. I'll put a couple other videos like ACDC, Econ, or whatever else to kind of help you out to supplement that too. But last ditch, if you're still having trouble, at the front of your review booklets, remember that I've got my email address there. Feel free to shoot me an email. I might not be able to answer right away, of course, because I'm going to have a newborn when y'all are seeing this probably. But I'll be able to get into it within a couple hours. So if you're struggling at all, and take a look back on your notes and go through these practice problems too. I think that's kind of a good way of looking at how the AP test is going to frame these topics. I think it's always a good place to start as well. So see you guys in 6.4.